Welcome to the Career Slay podcast, the show where we interview people who love their jobs and discuss career growth, fearless leadership, and creating a life you love. I'm your host, Kelly Pokes-Burke, a marketer turned executive coach, and I'm here to help you lead with courage and slay the fear in career. If you're a fan of these conversations and want to dive deeper into your own career and leadership questions, book a coaching discovery call with me at careerslay.com. Steph Gillies is a speaker, coach, and career development advocate who's written over 1,500 resumes, coached more than 400 professionals, and trained career development practitioners at institutions like Simon Fraser University. With a Bachelor of Social Work and a trauma-informed certificate, Steph understands how deeply work impacts well-being, something she's witnessed in others and lived herself through burnout in toxic workplaces. Her mission is to humanize career development. She believes it's not just about landing a job, but also about building a life that feels aligned. Blending strategy and storytelling, Steph helps people navigate job searches, reinvention, and leadership with clarity and confidence. When she's not working, you'll find her outdoors with her partner and son, fishing, camping, or spending time with her horse, Cash, and her dog, Ranger. Steph, welcome to the Career Slay podcast. Super excited to have you here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
I'm really interested in your backstory because I know we are on a similar journey being podcast hosts and career coaches. But let's start from the beginning. What were you like as a kid? And then how did that kind of upbringing influence how you are today?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, honestly, is when I was a kid, I knew exactly what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a vet. That was the only thing. I never wanted to be anything else. And people were always like, oh, you need to have a plan B. And I was like, I don't need a plan B. This is what I'm going to do. And I was so set on it. And then in my first year of university, I was like, I suck at physics and you have to do physics to get through. And so I ended up stopping university. I moved cities and then, went into a completely different degree. So I was a very focused kid. I knew exactly what I wanted when I wanted it. And I just thought things were going to work out for me. Fast forwarding to being a young adult, I had 32 jobs in 15 years because after being like, I know exactly what I want and then giving up on that, I was like, now what? And so I had no idea what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go. And so I focused it, I spent a lot of time trying a bunch of different jobs to see if they fit or if they didn't fit. And so that was kind of the adventure that I had then.
Whoa, I am just like floored. 32 different jobs across 15 years.
Yeah.
Tell me some of the highlights. Like, what were the most interesting ones that you tried out?
Yeah, so I was a horseback riding guide. So I took people on trail rides, which was super fun. I worked at a bank, which was like not my scene. I worked at Starbucks for like 2 weeks. That was an adventure, but I didn't like it. I was a server. I taught rock climbing. I ran summer camps, like preschool summer camps. I taught preschool for a year. There's a whole bunch. So it was all, I spent a lot of time working with kids back then. That was like something that I was good at, but not necessarily something that I really enjoyed. So I was kind of like figuring out what I liked versus what I was good at. So trying to figure out that and marry those passions together.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And, I love the fact that you tried so many different things. And it's actually something that I advise and, give advice to college students about. It's like, in order to find that right fit for your career, you got to make sure that you're trying on different types of work, different types of organizations, and then you'll understand like what works for you and what doesn't work for you. So what did you learn about yourself coming from that experience and kind of tailor fitting what works for you and what doesn't work for you?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I really just figured out this past year was that I'm a generalist, someone who is multi-passionate. And back then for me, what it felt like was that there was something wrong with me. I couldn't stick to one job. I would get bored easily. Once I got into a job and then I was really good at it, then I'd be like, okay, now what? I worked a lot in the nonprofit space as well. And so I would try to be like, okay, can we try something new? Can we run a new program? And they were always like, no, settle down. Like, this is what our funding is for. We can't go outside of that. And so that was really hard for me because I always wanted to be trying new things. And so that's why being an entrepreneur has been really helpful for me. But I think this past year, learning about what it means to be a generalist has really put it all into perspective. And I used to be super embarrassed about, talking about my 32 jobs. And now I embrace it because there's lots of people out there who have similar stories to mine, maybe not quite as many jobs, but very non-linear career paths. And I think that's just been, my story has helped them to see that they're not alone and that they are still employable and they can have a really successful career.
That's amazing. I love the fact that, you're embracing being a generalist. And I think so many of us, as we're growing up, we are asked that question of what do you want to be when you grow up? And it kind of narrows in on just this one outcome. But, careers aren't linear and you can try a bunch of different things and end up in a completely different place than where you started. So what made you want to start your own business?
I was laid off. So at the beginning of the pandemic, the charity wasn't really running as much as it could be because it was a lot of in-person events. So they laid me off at the beginning of the summer. And so I took some time to kind of figure out what I really wanted to do. And I had previously been certified as a resume writer like 7 or 8 years before that. And so I was like, maybe this is something I could actually turn into a career now that I have time. And so I found some contract work through outplacement agencies and, really perfected my skills and then started offering, my services to my own clients. And, I've been full time in my business now for 3.5 years. So that's how I got started.
Wow, that's incredible. And I love how you took that time period to just reset and think through where is it that you want to go. That's so important. Coming out of the pandemic, and I know that a lot of people like change jobs, like the whole great resignation happened. I'm sure that that was really impactful for your business. What would you say is one of the considerations for someone who is changing their job or career, and how does a resume play into that factor?
I mean, the resume plays a huge part. The thing when I was in the nonprofit space, I had been looking to leave my position for a while, and I felt like I was really pigeonholed and stuck in the nonprofit world, and I just didn't know that there would be other opportunities out there. And so I was applying for jobs that were way below my skill level and other jobs at just nonprofits, never looking outside of the nonprofit world because I thought I was stuck. And so one of the things that I know now, one of the things that I would tell myself back then is that, there's just so many transferable skills. And the thing is, when you're writing a resume, especially if you're in a very niche industry like, the nonprofit world or education or finance, those tend to be very specific in the way they communicate in their language. And really make sure that you're matching your language and your personal brand to whatever the language is of the person you're applying for. So you want to make sure that your resume and your LinkedIn profile speaks to the people you're targeting rather than just speaks to you or what position you're currently in. And so it's really about thinking forward, thinking about your next step and where you're going to go and how your career story plays into that.
Yeah, I love that idea of a career story. As a marketer, I'm all about like storytelling and that narrative and even just the personal branding piece. So if someone is trying to figure out, and you're the perfect person to tell this, to give advice on this, if someone's trying to figure out their career story, what are some considerations or pieces of advice that you would give?
Yeah, I think, there's so many transferable skills across all types of jobs, and so it's really about identifying the things that you really like to do, those things that you really want to continue doing, and those things you really don't want to continue doing. So for example, like I was sharing with you, I'm really good at working with kids. It's not necessarily something I'm like, yes, let's go. I'm so excited about this. And so you need to balance those things. Is that something I wanted to pursue as a long-term career? Not really, because it didn't make me super excited. I preferred, working with adults and stuff like that. And so really thinking about not just what you're good at, but whether you're passionate about it. And then looking at those different options and identifying some careers that could fit into those skills and those abilities that you bring into it. One of my previous clients, one of my most favorite stories is she was a director in a bank and she was looking to move into the nonprofit world and do more community-focused work. And she had been applying for jobs for like 6 to 8 months with her banking resume, and it just obviously wasn't getting any traction. And so what we did was we completely rebranded her resume. So we took it and we brought all of her volunteer experience to the top of the page. And then under her work experience, instead of talking about the banking stuff that she was doing, we talked about how she founded a culture club and how she initiated diversity, equity, and inclusion within her team and her community. And we really focused on that community development, the things that the hiring managers were looking for, the things that they wanted to see. And then in the cover letter, we addressed why she was making this change and why she was looking to transition into a very unusual direction. For that is typically the other way around. And she was able to secure a job, same level of position as she was currently in at a nonprofit within 3 months of updating the resume in that way, because then hiring managers understood why she was applying for this and how she could make an impact.
Wow, that's incredible. I know a lot of people feel like they have to go in chronological order or pull out the things that are their biggest wins in the previous career that they had. But what you're telling us is that no, it's about understanding what is the role that you want and then crafting your resume and tailoring it to tell that story of how you have the transferable skills to meet that need. That's incredible. Are cover letters dead? Is this something that people still use?
There was a stat that was posted on LinkedIn, and I'm not going to get it completely right, but it was something like 70% of hiring managers don't read cover letters, but 50 something percent want you to submit a cover letter. So submit a cover letter, but don't spend a lot of time on it. That's kind of the bottom line about it. And when I really do recommend people submit a cover letter is if you're applying to smaller companies, because they really want someone to fit into their culture. They want to know more about you. That can be helpful to share a little bit more about who you are and your personality. Another reason to submit a cover letter is if you have any red flags in your background. So like this person that I'm sharing, they look at her resume and they might be like, okay, yeah, I can get, she's volunteered a lot, but this is a very odd career transition. Why is she looking to leave the bank? And then you talk about it in the cover letter, then they're like, oh, okay, that makes more sense. Rather than just throwing it out, it gives them an opportunity to really understand the story.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think as a hiring manager, sometimes when you have a person who is transitioning careers and you're looking for a very specific skill set, you're filling in the gaps in your mind about like, oh, what is this person doing? It's like just big question marks. So I think having that cover letter as like an additional touch point to tell your story couldn't harm, right? Definitely could help. So let's go back to when you first started your business. You've been doing it for going on 4 years now. What was it like at the beginning?
Oh, yeah, it was hard. So, a lot of people, when they talk about starting a business, they started as a side hustle, but I obviously didn't have a job, so I just jumped in full time. And that was fine at the beginning because I was already unemployed for like 6 months or whatever at that point. But it's very stressful when you start and you need to reach a certain amount of income within a certain time period. So I would definitely recommend people start more as a side hustle than jumping in full time. But, it also allowed me the opportunity to really dive into it. And I spent 8 hours at my computer and I didn't always have work to do. So you're doing the marketing and you're learning and you're doing all this stuff so that you can grow your business. And I think that was a really helpful part of it. But it all comes down to motivation and taking action. We really have to be taking those baby steps every single day to grow your business. And I mean, I wouldn't give it up for anything now. I love where it is and where I'm going and I'm super excited about it. But those first few years are really hard.
Ooh, first few years. So if you're starting a business, keep at it. This is mainly advice for myself, honestly.
Okay, you know what? I talked to someone who is in business. She's a career coach and has been in business like 8 years. And she said the first year, you're just surviving. Year 2 and 3, you're starting to like understand what you're doing and become more of an expert. And then year 4 and 5 is when you're really building your business. And then year 6 is when it really starts to take off and become its own thing. And so I thought that was really interesting. Good motivation for people. They always say people quit within the first 5 years. So if you can stick out those 5 years, and that was the same experience that she had, is year 6 is really when it started to grow and become something that she was excited about. So
I love that. And I think it's about planting seeds for the future and you're not reaping the benefits of it right now, but you just got to keep believing in yourself and betting on yourself and motivating yourself to take action, like you said. So let's talk more about Destination Dream Job. What is it? Tell us more about it.
Yeah, for sure. It's really about helping people figure out what career direction they want to take. I've worked with a lot of people who are in transition, wanting to make changes to their career. And I work a lot with people who are multi-passionate or consider themselves a generalist. And so they have a lot of different career options. They could take their career in several different directions. And so what I help them do is I help them figure out that clarity, figure out where they want to go, what skills they want to use, and what direction they want to take their career. And then we really turn that into the career story piece. So really figuring out what makes them unique and then turning that into a story that resonates with hiring managers, but also gives them the confidence they need to go out into the workplace and talk about themselves. So that can include, the personal branding, so resume, cover letter, LinkedIn, as well as preparing for interviews, like how do you answer the tell me about yourself question and stuff like that. So it really resonates with you and also leaves an impact on the people you're talking to.
That's awesome. And being a career coach myself, it's just so energizing to see the before and after of these clients and how what you're doing is really impacting their lives. How do you see purpose fitting within your career and what you do today?
It's interesting because I don't talk about this a lot, but when I started my resume business, I also started another business. So I am really passionate about horses. And so I started a business doing horse therapy with like youth and adults at the same time as when I started this business. And that was really a business of passion. And I was like, this is what I want to do long term. Like this, I'm so excited about this. The resume thing was like a side thing that I was just doing to make money. And I was like, this is going to be where it's at. This is my purpose. This is for sure what I want to do. The interesting thing happened about a year in. I mean, I had some business partners, and so that just didn't work out. But also, I really started to love the online space. And I just found that even though resume writing wasn't like, I'm like, this is my purpose, I started to love it. And I started to love, impacting people and helping them figure out their career direction. And then it morphed into kind of what it is today. And so after a year of the horse business, I ended up closing that down and leaving the business. Now I just have my horse for fun instead of work. And I really found that combining that passion with work, I started getting resentful going out to the barn and seeing my horse. And it was like, oh, I don't really want to do this. And so it was really interesting. So I always thought, you have to have a purpose and your work has to be your purpose. And that really showed me that that's not necessarily true, right? Some people do. Some people easily combine those two and they love it. But I don't think that's necessary to have a fulfilling career. And you can cultivate passion and purpose in something that you're doing that maybe you didn't expect. Like I'm doing with the career coaching is I love it now and I find that there's a lot of purpose and passion in it, but it's just totally different from what I was expecting.
Yeah, no, that is a 180. I mean, like also starting two businesses at the same time, that's really ambitious of you.
Yep.
But I think that's a fascinating observation. So what would you say are the components of a fulfilling career?
I think it's really about seeing your whole life, all the values, right? So it's not just about work, how much money you make and all this stuff. It's about what are the values of your life overall and does your career fit into it? So I'm sure you've worked with similar people. I've worked with people who have a career that pays them the wage they want. They go to work, they like it good enough, and then they can go home and they can travel and they can spend time with their family and it gives them more of that work-life balance. And then I've worked with people who are like, I love hockey and I'm going to work in the hockey industry. And this is what I want to do. It doesn't matter how much time it takes. That's what I want. And so it really depends on each person and what their values are for their life. And so your job doesn't necessarily have to be your purpose, but you want your job to be something that contributes to the rest of the values of your life. So if you want more of that free time to spend with kids, maybe becoming a lawyer is not the best choice, or if you want, or if work is like something that you love and that's, you don't have kids and that's something that you want your whole life to be focused on, then you can choose different options like that as well. So I think I really talk to my clients about creating something that impacts the entire value system of their life. Because work is 30% of what we do. And that's a lot. That's a lot of time.
Yeah, for sure. And everything that you said resonates with me. And I completely agree. It's like figuring out what are your priorities? What are your values? I think that kind of becomes the guardrails for finding your North Star. So what would you say is the biggest challenge that people are facing in the workforce today?
I think everyone is kind of noticing that it's an employer's market. So it's very competitive. So, what you were doing 3 years ago, even 2 years ago, isn't going to work today. That resume piece and making sure you have a really strong brand, the one that speaks to hiring managers, is going to be more important than ever. And also leveraging the networking side of it, right? Not just relying on those online applications, because hiring managers are getting hundreds upon hundreds of applications. And so I think the biggest part of it is this employer's market and really making sure that you showcase how you can set yourself apart. That's really what it's all about right now.
Yeah, so it's really about knowing your story and finding ways to stand out, to be distinctive. No different than branding or marketing yourself in a way, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Like 3 years ago when I first started, if people were like, oh, I'm a yoga instructor, but I'm applying to a sales position, I'd be like, oh, well, nobody really cares that you're a yoga instructor. Let's just leave that off. But now I actually encourage people to bring those parts of their lives into your career story because really the only thing that sets you apart is being you. I wrote a resume a couple of months ago for someone who was applying to a sales role and was also a yoga instructor. And we talked about how being a certified yoga instructor really gave her that empathy and people skills, being more personable with people, and really helps her to see what people need and be able to sell things in a little bit more empathetic and a more, problem solution way. And so that was a great way. And she actually got a job pretty quickly doing that. And so people want to see these things. Everyone can say, we've got all these sales numbers, but that yoga instructor was what set her apart. And so it really shared a story that she was able to stand behind and something she was also excited about.
Wow, that's incredible. I love how you're bringing your whole self to work now in that sense, and you're being super authentic about it. You don't have to compartmentalize part of your life on your resume anymore. You also have a podcast.
Yeah, so my podcast is called Destination Dream Job, the same name as my business. And I interview people from all over the job search space, from recruiters to business coaches to other career coaches, resume writers, just to give people tips on job search strategies and how they can, improve their job search. I'm going to be starting to interview people who are in specific positions so that we can create episodes around like, what is it like to be a project manager? What is it like to be in marketing? So that people, when they're trying to figure out the direction of their career, they can come to the podcast and they can be like, hey, project management is something that interests me. Let's see if it's actually something that would fit in my life. And so that's something that's going to be a new project for the new year.
Oh, I love that. And definitely same vibes as Career Slay in the spirit of like what we do here. In that spirit, how would you describe like a day in the life of a resume writer?
Being a resume writer is really interesting and it can be a lot of fun. What it looks like is when I write a resume is I usually meet with my clients for an hour before. Some resume writers don't do this, but I find that if someone knows what to put in their resume, they've probably already written it themselves by now. So what I do in that 1 hour is I really draw out their accomplishments and really focus on, those skills that they're looking to get into in their career transition into this next role. So that can sometimes mean thinking outside the box. And a lot of times people really struggle, and I'm sure you've experienced the same thing. They really struggle to identify what is an accomplishment. They might be like, this is just something I do every day. And I'm like, yeah, but in the job description, they want to see that. So I help them pull those things out and really identify what those accomplishments could be. And then I take that and turn it into, a resume, LinkedIn profile, cover letter that can really, really resonate with them. And a lot of my clients find that even just seeing that first draft, they're like, wow, I didn't realize I could apply to all these jobs. But now that I see the way you see my background, I have a lot more options out there. And sometimes for a lot of my clients, that can mean multiple resumes, especially if they're generalists or multi-passionates. They might have, a marketing resume, a project management resume, an operations resume, and then they use each of those resumes to apply to these different positions and kind of test the market and see who their background resonates with.
I totally tell my clients the same thing. It's about like tailor your story to fit what that job description is and have multiple versions of your resume, because you'll dial up different parts of your resume based off of what the job description says and what the job entails. But also, do you include a summary section?
Yeah, I do include a summary section, but I try to focus it like in with that client I was telling you who is a sales director as well as a yoga instructor. We talk about that right up front in the summary section. So it really helps them stand out and it's not something as generic as what a lot of people would put on their resume. And so I really encourage that in that top section, you really focus on what makes you unique and what sets you apart. Really dive deep. I mean, whenever I ask people that question, what sets you apart, they always tell me they're a good communicator and empathetic leader. So I'm talking about like diving deeper than that, Okay, that's great that you have those skills, but what is deeper? What is something that you offer that other people maybe don't? And so really trying to figure out what those things are and then bringing those to the forefront in that summary section right at the top.
Yeah, that's awesome. That summary section is so important because especially if you're transitioning or pivoting, then it gives you an opportunity to tell your story in an authentic way to show how these skills that you've gained are transferable.
Exactly.
We briefly touched about career story, but do you want to dive a little bit deeper into what that is?
There's a great book by Karen Twigg called The Career Stories Method, and it's a really great way to identify your career story. I'm just halfway through it now and I'm really enjoying it. But what it's about is really putting all those pieces together. You think about it and a lot of times people are like, okay, these are my strengths. They're over here. This is what makes me unique. And then these are the jobs that I've really enjoyed or the tasks that I've enjoyed. And they're all kind of separate. But what I encourage people to do is really find the themes throughout and then look into what those different jobs could be for those people. But I think the key is to bring that all together into a story about what makes you unique, who you are, and what strengths you bring, and then have that across all of your personal branding. So whether that's your resume, your cover letter, LinkedIn profile, interviewing, when you're networking, you have very similar stories throughout so that people don't come to one part of your life and they're like, oh, that's really interesting. And then you meet them in person and they're telling something completely different. So really bringing that authenticity into it and building that career story that really helps them feel confident and comfortable to talk about in front of other people.
Yeah, that authenticity is so important. Any tips on how to show up authentically when it comes to the interview?
Yeah, that's a tough part for sure, because people are really nervous when it comes to interviews and you have to be cautious because it's a very professional environment. But I think that when you think about the behavioral questions, you often have a lot of stories that you need to tell. And so what I encourage people to do is think of these stories before even looking at any interview questions. So what are your top 5 stories throughout your career that you're so proud of? And those are the stories that you want to make sure you tell. And often what you'll find is those stories fit into multiple different interview questions. And so that can help bring that authenticity in instead of just trying to find a story that might fit into, their question. You're finding stories that you're also very proud of.
Yeah, I think it's important to show up as your most authentic self, and that requires being comfortable with who you are, right? So, Steph, tell us more about what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
Where was I when I was 20? Which job was I in?
Which job was that?
I think the biggest thing I would tell myself is that it's okay to change your mind. I was so worried about like, okay, I gotta find my thing, like just like we were told when we're teenagers, you need to find the thing that you're gonna do for the rest of your life. And what I do tell young people and what I would tell my 20-year-old self is that whatever you make up your mind now doesn't mean you can't change it later. There's so many people, especially I think in people in their 30s and 40s right now, are like, I fell into this job and I'm been stuck here for a while, but this has never been what I wanted to do. Or I'm bored of it and I want to make a change, but they're so worried about like what that looks like and is it okay to make a change? And maybe I should just stay because this is comfortable. And so it's really, I just think that people can reinvent themselves whenever they want. So I would tell that to my 20-year-old self, just embrace where you are now. Don't worry so much about like changing your mind and trying all these different jobs. It's the perfect time to do it when you're that age. And I would definitely recommend that. So all young people, I mean, maybe don't change jobs 32 times, but don't be afraid of, changing your mind and making a career shift. There's so many opportunities out there and it's just really about going after it and trying things out.
Yeah, I love that perspective. And I think it's one that we need to hear more often because there's so much pressure to choose the right major. And then that sets you on this path to success, but that's not how success happens at all. It's about really finding something that you're good at and then building on that skill. And if that doesn't work out, you could always change your mind and transfer your skills.
Yeah, exactly. Like right now, I think they're saying that millennials stay in jobs 5 to 7 years before changing, and Gen Z stays in jobs like 3 to 5 years before changing jobs. So it's not like, boomers who stay in their jobs like 40 years anymore. And I've unfortunately worked with people who are in their early 60s who've worked at an organization for 40 years and then get laid off in favor of someone younger and cheaper. It's just having a job isn't a sure thing like it was back in my parents' time. And so making sure that you are growing your skills and you're thinking about yourself in your career, not always the organization, so that you can make sure you're making decisions that are going to impact the longevity of your own career.
Yeah. And typically when you switch jobs or change jobs, you'll get a pay increase or a bump with that. And that'll outpace what inflation is. So it's to your benefit to always be looking for the opportunities that are going to help you grow.
Yeah, 100%.
Steph, it's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast. I have one last question for you, and this is something that we ask all of our guests. If you had to sum up your career in 3 words, what would it be?
Honestly, I think that the name of my business would be what I would sum it up as: Destination Dream Job. Because I don't believe that a dream job is a destination, which is funny, ironic, but I do believe that it's a journey, right? It's a journey that we're on to find what this dream job is for this moment in our lives. And so that has summed up, my career, trying to figure that out and live out that journey. And now I love helping other people do the same, which is why I named my business that. So
that's incredible. How can people find you?
I hang out on LinkedIn. That is primarily where I am, under my name, Steph Gillies. I also have a website, Destination Dream Job, and you can check out my podcast under the same name.
Well, Steph, thank you so much for joining us on Career Slate. It's been such a pleasure and also just so fun to catch up with someone who does the same work, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
The Career Slate podcast is a co-production of Career Slate and Weld Reply. This episode was produced by Asia Lane and Michael Burke, with editing by Tyra Greer and Michael Burke. If you like the show, subscribe and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you're ready to level up, pivot, or lead with confidence, book a coaching discovery call with me at careerslate.com.